I hold very few of my own, but I possess knowledge that could overturn stock markets and upset geopolitics. I can be a man of great influence, but you wouldn't know my name. On paper, I'm an attorney, but many of the purposes for which my clients utilize me fall outside of what you might consider legal bounds. As an attorney for the rich, both infamous and anonymous, secrets come with the territory. I find the easiest way to keep them is not to talk at all. The sorts of things I know could easily slip out, be betrayed by a slight hesitation or a fleeting expression. For this reason, I generally keep to myself. So why am I opening up now? Why am I talking? Truthfully, I may not be long for this world. Before I go, I think I'd like to shake things up a little bit, to give you all some insight into the forces that really drive this world. On Wednesday, October 9th, a client of mine who I will call Lawrence Crutchfield came to my office with a small cigar box and a request to amend his last will and testament. An amendment? Shouldn't be a problem. I hope everything's all right between you and Adele, I said, referring to his wife to whom the entire Crutchfield estate would fall on the event of his passing. Lawrence probably thought I was concerned for his marriage, but it was his life I was thinking of. Many clients with wills similar to his experience sudden and unexpected deaths soon after filing them. "Oh no, everything's just fine with Adele," Lawrence replied with phony laughter. He said, "I don't want to change where anything goes after I die. I just want to add a statement or whatever you would include to keep someone out of a will." I asked, "Do you mean a beneficiary who might succeed Adele if she, heaven forbid, should pass as well?" Lawrence looked visibly uncomfortable as he slid into the chair across from me. "I guess so. I just want to make sure there isn't any chance anyone claiming to be my child or my wife's can claim any part of my estate." I'm sure my eyebrows must have reached my receding hairline as I said, "I wasn't aware you had any children." Lawrence replied, "I said claiming to be my child. That's an important specification. Look, Rollins, I know it sounds odd, but you're just going to have to forgive me for not saying more. I know you're discreet, and I'd appreciate that discretion here. I'd rather you and I be the only ones who know about this." I said, "So Adele doesn't..." Lawrence interrupted. "No, she doesn't know I'm here. Really, Rollins, I can't say any more." I told him I'd find the papers and be right back. On my way to my office door, I heard Lawrence make a guttural noise and looked back. He held up his wooden box. Something small clattered inside. "One more thing, Rollins," he said, twisting in his chair to look at me. I asked, "What is it?" referring both to his request and the item inside the box. He asked, "You still have those safe deposit boxes downstairs?" He was referring to the wall of safety deposit boxes in my basement, where some of my clients trusted me to store items they did not trust at the bank. I told him yes, and that I still had a few boxes available. "This box," he said, waving the cigar box at me again. "I don't want anyone but us to know it even exists. I don't care if it stays locked up forever. I just want to be absolutely certain nobody else knows where to find it and that it never sees the light of day again." "May I know what's inside?" I asked. He said, "I'd rather you not." Now, I mentioned I hold many secrets. What I did not mention is how much I relish those secrets. I, for better or worse, am someone who enjoys knowing things. Does it probably put a target on my back? Does it make some very powerful people a bit anxious around me? Most assuredly. However, I keep from feeling any anxiety myself by maintaining my trustworthy reputation. I could make a healthy living doing more mundane work for more typical people. But sometimes I think it is the secrets that tempt me to keep operating in the shadows. It is the secrets, which keep me alive. I said to Lawrence, if I'm to be the sole proprietor of this box, which will be stored in my home, amongst coveted items of many people more powerful than you, I'll add, I'll need to see what's inside first. Lawrence clutched his jaw, the corners of his lips twitching with suppressed anger. But after only a few seconds, he sighed and said, "All right then, it's a key." He lifted the lid off the box, releasing a mildewy odor, and showed me a large brass key with a black ribbon tied to the end. I asked, "Do I get to know what it opens?" Lawrence shook his head as if disappointed in me for asking. I nodded, understanding. "Actually," Lawrence said, "if you don't mind, I'd like to see this key locked up before we work on the adjustment to my will. It would help me think a little bit clearer, put my mind at ease." "Just so I know what to expect," I said, "there isn't going to be anyone looking for this, is there? Anyone who might come here in their search?" "No, Rollins, no need to worry about that. There's only one other person on this planet who knows this key exists, and if anything happens to me, it will fall to her anyway. I imagine she'll be perfectly content to let you hold on to it." "So Adele does know you're here," I said. Lawrence said, she knows about the key and what it's for. She doesn't need to know it's here unless something happens to me." I asked no further questions. Instead, I led Lawrence to my basement and let him watch me lock his box away. You may, by now, have guessed the key in Lawrence's cigar box possessed some significance, and that I should have pried harder at him before taking it into my custody. But what you must understand is how utterly ordinary this meeting with Lawrence seemed at the time. I'm used to my clients entrusting me with bizarre items and requests. More than one of the items locked away in my basement are heirlooms my clients have left out of wills so as not to let them fall into the hands of troubled children or wayward spouses. I'm also well used to my clients acting dodgy, withholding information. As the saying goes, this was just another day at the office. If I've made it seem at all out of the ordinary, it is only due to my recollection being recolored by the knowledge I later gained about exactly what Lawrence had entrusted me to keep. Not 2 weeks later, Lawrence Crutchfield suffered a fatal aneurysm while driving his wife through the countryside near their remote estate. He owned roughly 100 acres in the country, which included his mansion, an extensive garage, and a 9-hole golf course that he built with a construction company he owned. Lawrence and Adele liked to go for long rides in his Porsche through the surrounding countryside, and it was on one of these pleasure cruises that Lawrence lost his life and nearly took Adele with him. He'd been going 70 when the aneurysm shut him down. The Porsche flew across the opposite lane, over the ditch, and played pinball in the bordering woods before being forced to a stop by a 300-year-old tree. Lawrence was pronounced dead at the scene, and Adele was rushed to the hospital with injuries exacerbated by the roughly 90 minutes which passed before anyone found them. As outlined in his will, Lawrence's body was cremated 3 days later. Adele called me from the hospital to ask if I had the box Lawrence wanted to lock up. Since he told me she knew about the cigar box and key, I assured her they were safe, and then discussed a few of the pressing details in his will, mostly regarding his funeral. She told me she would postpone his funeral until she was back on her feet. Although she sustained severe injuries, the doctor gave her a hopeful prognosis. In the meantime, Lawrence's ashes came to me. Again, these are the sorts of arrangements my clients make. Many of the rich fear their extended families and would rather trust their remains to someone they are paying than anyone related to them by blood. I don't enjoy being in this position, but it is one I often find myself in. I put the urn in the basement room adjacent to the safe boxes and went upstairs for dinner. Lawrence Crutchfield did not cross my mind again until after I'd fallen asleep. I woke before my alarm rang the following morning. My body is trained to wake at a regular time and rarely needs assistance. Operating with such regularity helps make one a more dependable person, And if I'm not dependable, I am nothing. I stretched, then swung my legs over the side of my bed and walked to my bathroom to take a cold shower. Nothing wakes me up better than 3 minutes of icy water trickling down my skin. It is unpleasant, but those 3 minutes give me an extra hour of productivity that I would otherwise spend in a groggy state. I refuse to get addicted to caffeine and must find alternative methods of enlivening my mind and body in the morning. I opened my bathroom door to find, instead, a dark, entirely concrete hallway in which I could somehow see despite the absence of any light. I closed my eyes, drew in a long breath, then opened them again. The hallway remained. Waking had felt so real, but I decided I must still be dreaming, and, sheerly out of curiosity, I passed through the door. Not a moment after stepping through, my bedroom disappeared behind me. The doorway became more hallway, stretching back as far as the ghostly light allowed me to see. It smelled like soil and fungus. If not for the certainty I was dreaming, I would have worried about breathing in mold spores. I started down the hallway without any expectations. I wanted the dream to take me where it wished. I realized as I walked that I possessed full control over my thoughts and actions. Lucid dreaming is something I had pursued before with mixed results, but this time I found consciousness within the dream so quickly and effortlessly it caught me by surprise. In my past experiences, the moment I gained consciousness, the dreams evaporated. Something about this dream held me so tight I wasn't sure I could leave it if I wanted to. I tired of the seemingly infinite hallway after what might have been 5 or 10 minutes. I doubt it was any longer, but wouldn't be surprised to learn so. At that point, I attempted to free myself of the dream, but as I feared, I found it would not release me. Rather than panic and flounder, I pushed on in search of an exit or escape, and before long I discovered a door. An orange light that pulsed with an uneven, natural rhythm glowed around its edge. The smell of wood smoke intensified the closer I stood. I reached for the handle, but the door started opening before I touched it. It swung slowly inward, releasing a wave of heat. Smoke billowed out, burning my lungs and making me cough forcefully. I wondered if my unconscious body was coughing as well. Behind the door, I found another hallway, this one engulfed by roaring flames. I recognized it as the upstairs to my house through the vortex of heat and light, the impenetrable inferno. Then a horrible idea occurred to me. What if this vision of my burning hallway had leaked into my dream due to a real sensory input? What if the smoke I smelled was real, and this is how my brain was telling me to wake up? I threw the door open and charged into the fire. I dodged my way through the flames, still choking on the smoke as if it were real, until I found my bedroom door. The frame around it had blackened and curled with striped white charcoal at its edges. The door itself sprouted active flames which lashed out at me, daring me to attempt to enter the room they guarded. I'd already committed, and thus far the fire had not harmed anything but my lungs. I lunged for the doorknob, twisted it, and collapsed into my bedroom. There I saw myself on the bed, still and unaware. The bedroom had not yet caught flames, but smoke now billowed in, blackening the faint light from the crack in the curtain until I could no longer see myself. I went to the light switch, praying the electricity had not shut off yet. I flicked the light switch, but the lights did not brighten the room enough to waken me. I moved across the room to the bathroom, where I turned on the rattly overhead fan and began slamming the door repeatedly. Still, I failed to wake myself. I stumbled on the idea that I could not wake while my consciousness roamed. I rushed toward my bed in order to reunite my soul with my body, not knowing how I might do such a thing. I reached down, pulled the blankets off of myself, and touched something warm and squirming I did not expect to find. I grabbed the thing and pulled it toward me through the smoke until I could see it clearly. A baby. Practically a newborn infant wriggled joyfully in my hands. I became lost in its big brown eyes, mesmerized by the odd maturity I saw there. So lost I became, I did not notice the smoke dissipate, the flames cool and vanish, and the room transform once more into the infinite hallway. The baby in my hands wriggled until I couldn't help but set it down. To my surprise, it stood evenly on both feet as if it had sprung from the womb, able to walk. Worse still, it pointed, directing me to continue down the hallway. Doubts sprang into my mind about the validity of anything I'd seen thus far, which allowed me to relax somewhat. It's hard to relax with a days-old baby following you, though. The child walked me to the very end of the hall where another door waited. This one didn't smell like smoke or glow with firelight. It looked like solid steel with a bolt lock and simple handle, like a door one might see in a meat locker or on a walk-in freezer. I tried to open it, but found it locked. Something nudged my hand and I looked down. The child stood next to me. He, I think it was a boy, took my hand in both of his, folded my fingers closed, then pushed my hand up toward me. I lifted it, opened my fingers, and there in my palm I found the brass key with the black ribbon tied around it. I recognized it immediately. The faint light of the hallway pronounced the key's pockmarks and tarnish. It had looked so placid and harmless in Lawrence's cigar box, but in my hand now, it looked like a totem of pure evil. The child walked with his creepily even steps to the door in front of me. He pointed a chubby finger and touched the bolt lock, then looked back at me expectantly. Unsure whether I remained in control of myself, I stepped forward and inserted the key. When I hesitated to turn it, a look of fury and disgust flashed across the infant's face. It froze like that, making an expression which implied he was about to cry. I sensed a serious threat behind the child's eyes as it gazed up at me, with its face wrenched that way. I feared it would do much more than scream at me if I refused to turn the key. Again, thinking this was only a dream, I turned the key slowly, feeling every grating vibration as the bolt slid. It released with a thunk, and the child eagerly jumped up to twist the doorknob. As soon as the door opened a crack, the child dropped from the knob and landed on all fours, then scurried through the door like a rodent. The door stopped swinging, partially open. I peered through it, wondering where the child ran off to, but there was no light inside the next room at all. Not even the ghostly light of the hallway bled into the impenetrable darkness beyond this threshold. I pushed the door the rest of the way open in hopes I might allow more light in, but it did no good. "Please," I heard a voice rasp in the shadows. It was too deep, too old to belong to the child. It clearly belonged to a grown man. "Hello?" I called out, not moving any closer. "Please get me out of here," the voice spoke again. I said, "I can't see you. Come toward me." The voice whispered, "He has me. I can't get away." "The baby?" I asked. No answer came. Two yellow lights lit up at what I assumed to be the back of the room. They rose into the air. The shadows filling the room coalesced around them, moving in reverse. As the shadows coalesced into the figure, the rest of the room became visible, slowly at first, but then exponentially faster. I soon began to notice a shape, a bundle of some sort resting in the center of the floor. Only when most of the shadows had joined the figure at the back could I tell the bundle was a man. And only once every last wisp of blackness had been absorbed could I tell the man was me. Me sat on his knees with his hands behind his back, head bowed forward, not in reverence, but exhaustion. Slowly, he raised his head. His eyes looked bloodshot, his irises pushing into the redness, desperate for light. He looked like he hadn't eaten or drank anything for days. His repulsively greasy hair stuck straight up in the back. "I can't get away," the other me muttered. You have to help me." "How did you get here?" I asked. "Tell me and I'll—" The figure behind him lurched forward. Its feet remained planted, but its hulking shoulders bent toward the other me on the ground. One of its hands grasped the tuft of hair sticking up and yanked it backward. Wheezing, the other me cried, "You're already here. It already has you. You have to bring the key. It's the only—" He sucked in a strangled breath. "The only way." "Where do I bring it?" I asked, truly wanting to know. The creature's eyes rose to meet mine, and suddenly I knew what the other me had meant when he said it already had me. I felt its influence stir inside me like a festering brood of worms. I'd allowed Lawrence to bring this thing into my house, and it had infected me. What was the key for, and why had Lawrence been so unwilling to tell me? The door to the other me's cell banged shut. I felt myself ripped backwards, my heels sliding across the stony floor by some force without regard for my will. We passed the door to my burning room and continued beyond where I thought I'd entered the dream. I felt myself lifted up, and suddenly my feet dangled below me. They knocked against rungs of a cold steel ladder, more shiny than I would have expected in such a dank, dark place. A brief squealing sound, then light shone down upon me. The dream hoisted me out of a circular hole, then dropped me gracelessly onto my back. I scrambled to my feet, prepared to flee from that dark creature which absorbed all the shadows. When I turned around, I saw nothing there. Nothing but a manhole cover in the grass. Leafless trees surrounded me. Beyond them, I saw clearly, even under the darkness of night, a golf course. I looked down and saw I was standing less than 10 feet from a sand trap. I called out, but unsurprisingly, no one answered. I tried to take a step, but tripped over a gnarled tree root protruding from the ground. I looked up and saw the rest of the tree, equally twisted and lumpy. Before risking another step, I glanced around and saw that many, if not most, of the tree roots were bulging out of the dirt as if the trees might uproot themselves and run away, or close in. This became my last observation before the dream flickered away with a blink of my eyes as I awoke. I found myself not in bed, but standing in my bathroom, hands on the sink as I leaned toward the mirror. The face reflected there matched the face I saw in the cell in the dream. My own, but haggard, sunken, and broken. Without parting his lips, my reflection screamed, "Bring the key!" I re-entered reality, opening my eyes in my bed. But I swear, to this day, that scream still echoed in the bathroom. I'm not imaginative enough to make any of this up. You might imagine that in my line of work it benefits one not to be paranoid or anxious. I contend it is quite the opposite. To guard the secrets and treasures of the elite, one must be extraordinarily paranoid, and while maybe not anxious, cautious at the very least. Paranoia allows you to confront possibilities you otherwise might not have imagined. If you can harness it, know how to control it, and wield it, it can be quite the motivator. My dream, which seemed to blend so effortlessly with reality, triggered a fresh bout of paranoia in me. I spent the entire morning wondering whether I might have received the visions not from my subconscious, but rather something less metaphorically below me, in my basement. If such a force could control my dreams, what else could it do? A single factor prevented me from acting that day. my previously maintained disbelief in the supernatural. I wasn't about to give that up over a nightmare and a mild suspicion. I spent the remainder of the day conducting business which you have no business knowing about. But that night, as I slept, the vision haunted me again. This time it started with a still image of that manhole in the grass surrounded by knobby trees next to the golf course. I quickly descended into the faintly lit hallway. There was the glowing door, which opened into my flaming bedroom again. Once more I could taste smoke, but this time I knew it to be dream material only. Once lucid enough to take control, I rushed to my bedside, tried to wake myself. This time, dream me sat up straight, which I fully expected to tear me away from the dream. Instead, I remained to watch dream me turn his head slowly in my direction, eyes still shut. A column of flame suddenly crackled at higher volume, defining itself against the others. A great boom followed, signaling the collapse of one of the bedroom walls. The roof sagged. The flames began chewing through it. My other self's eyes flashed open. He leaned toward me with his arms held outward, palms up. His mouth dropped open, and he began to gleefully chant, "Look at me, the devil's skin bag. Look at me, the devil's skin bag." I tried to back away, but he grabbed hold of my wrist before I even noticed him move, his gleeful grin replaced by a scowl. He snarled in a voice not my own, "You'll be dead by your birthday, skin bag." I broke free and ran from the room, slamming the door behind me. I just stood there, panting for some time. My birthday, October 31st, was only 3 days away. The door at the far end of the hallway swung open on its own. My vision zoomed in on it for me. I saw myself in that room again, on my knees, hands bound behind my back. I looked into my eyes and found them full of terror and despair. Once more, that shadowy creature loomed behind the other me, its eyes burning. This time, its hands reached forward and grasped my other self's face. Its fingers dug into his eyes, nose, and mouth and pulled as if to rip his head in two. As he fought off the ripping fingers, the other me screamed, Bring the key before it's too late." Everything froze then. I remained lucid, but unable to control how I moved in the dream any longer. Locked in place, I was forced to stare down the hallway at myself, losing to that awful shadow figure. I could do nothing but stare into my own petrified eyes as the figure tore my twin self's head in two. My separated jaws looked like a flower, my opened throat a spasming red fountain. Some particularly violent spurts of blood indicated I was still trying to breathe. I screamed and woke up in my bed. 6 hours had passed. I now had the proof I needed to entertain my paranoia. For the first time in my life, I considered the possibility of a supernatural influence, something connected to the key Lawrence Crutchfield asked me to store before he died. It occurred to me the dreams began after I brought Lawrence's ashes home, not after he brought me the key, but I fixated on the key due to its importance in both nights' visions. It seemed to be, forgive me, the key to solving whatever was going on. Perhaps Lawrence had been similarly tormented before his demise, and by bringing his remains into my home, I set the force's sights upon myself. We'd arranged my storing of Lawrence's key via nothing more than a verbal agreement. His last will and testament contained no reference to the key at all. With Adele Crutchfield still hospitalized, I could not in good conscience pass the cigar box along to her. Not yet. What if the strange visions took hold of an innocent nurse, doctor, or patient? I thought, what better place to move it than the Crutchfield's currently vacant home? I could warn Adele about it, if she didn't know about its curse already, but I was under no obligation to. I believe Lawrence had once mentioned a close friend of theirs, a man of the cloth. Either way, I felt sure Adele, with all her resources, could find someone to help her deal with whatever power the key held or represented. I decided on this course of action and secreted the cigar box out of my basement. It made me nervous placing it in my car to drive out to the Crutchfield's country estate, but I kept reminding myself that Lawrence had successfully brought it to me. Lawrence. On my way out, I brought his gold urn with me. I did have a contractual agreement to hold his ashes for Adele, but what would she do? Sue me? What judge would bother hearing that case? I reversed his trip without issue. Tall red flags scattered around the property caught my attention as I drove up the Crutchfield's long driveway. I had forgotten about Lawrence's personal 9-hole course. I couldn't say for certain whether it resembled the golf course in my dream, but what a coincidence. Leaving the cigar box in my passenger seat, I skirted the enormous house for a better view of the entire course. And there, staring across at the furthest end of the course, I saw it. The knobby grove of trees, the very same from my visions. Although not a betting man, I would have staked my entire net worth that I would find a manhole amid their roots. I feared I may have entered yet another dream. I worried I might wake again in my bed at any moment. Although I'd done business with Lawrence Crutchfield for nearly a decade, I had never been to his home or seen his property. His golf course was merely a few months old. Surely I could not have seen many images, if any, which included it. My confusion at the uncannily familiar sight slowly evolved into dread about what it meant. I could doubt supernatural interference no longer. I found a golf cart parked next to the garage with the keys left in it. I set the cigar box and urn beside me in the seat and rode down to the knobby grove. The grass surrounding the trees came as high as my knees, even though the rest of the golf course and lawn looked immaculate. I guessed the Crutchfields had instructed their groundskeeper to leave the grove alone. Lawrence wouldn't have wanted him to stumble upon what I was looking for there. The manhole cover. I found it. In the middle of those leafless trees, I discovered the cast iron plate which I had seen twice in visions and never anywhere else. Now I had to wrestle with the decision to open it or not. A padlock I had not seen in the dream secured the cover, but there was a second key hanging from the golf cart's key ring that matched the lock's brand. When I considered the rest of what I saw in those dreams, the decision actually came quite easily. Lawrence Crutchfield was dead. What did it matter to him if I took his key down there and left it for whatever force now had its claws in me instead of leaving it in the house as I originally intended? I kept connecting the key he left me that day with his worry about someone trying to claim his inheritance. He never made any statement which actually linked the two. He'd brought me the key that day for convenience's sake. I reminded myself I had no legal obligation regarding the key. After going through this round of reasoning, I unlocked the manhole cover and descended the all-too-familiar ladder into the equally and terribly familiar hallway in the underground tunnel. I almost dropped Lawrence's remains at one point. A little bit of him slipped out and cascaded into the darkness. I believe most people would have described the tunnel as a bunker. Since I left the cover off, enough ambient light shone down to illuminate it. It matched what I saw in my dreams, in that the walls, floor, and ceiling were all made of concrete. But in the real tunnel, only one door waited for me at the end. The side door, which always led to my burning bedroom, did not really exist, and where it always stood in the dream, I saw a tall wooden cross mounted to the concrete instead. There were other symbols lining the walls as well, none of which I'd been shown in the visions. I cannot tell you whether they were religious or pagan. They were likely a mixture of both, but I will just say they did not appear to be decorative. They varied in size and material. Some, like the cross, were sculptures or monograms, and others were merely paintings and drawings. More symbols drawn in wax lined the floor all the way to the door at the far end. It felt like I'd just dropped into the tomb of a pharaoh, and in fact, some of the symbols did look Egyptian. I wondered why none of them had appeared in my dreams. I approached the door with great apprehension, careful not to smear any of the symbols on the floor with my shoes. The brass lock set looked much older than the rest of the steel door. I thought the original lock set must have been replaced, but why? I opened the cigar box and stared at the key for a few seconds before taking it out. It must have been my imagination, but I swore I could feel the key pulling itself toward the lock like a magnet. I held them close together, comparing their metals, and saw they matched. I felt certain this door was what the key opened, the final barrier between me and whatever waited on the other side. My memory of that looming shadow creature whispered into my thoughts. It seemed impossible such a creature could actually exist, so I did not truly expect to see it if I opened the door, but I feared whatever it represented. Something on the other side wanted me to open that door. It had threatened my life to coerce me. Bring the key, my dream self had instructed. I checked, but there was no room to slide the key under the door. In order to complete my charge, I would have to open it. I decided to simply get it over with. I inserted the key and twisted. It rotated easier than I expected for such an old lock in such a heavy-set door. The bolt opened with a deep pop. I gave the key a quarter turn back and removed it. Then I twisted the knob. There were no lights in the room. It was completely black until some of the faint light from the tunnel entered through the partially open door. I held my breath and waited for something to happen. After a few moments passed in silence and stillness, I placed the key back in the cigar box and gently kicked it into the room. It slid across the floor, coming to rest at the edge of the light. Nothing but curiosity prevented me from slamming that door shut and evacuating the tunnel immediately, but my curiosity is a powerful force. I waited for 5, then 10 seconds. Just after I accepted that nothing would happen, I heard a soft sliding sound in the darkness. Then I wanted to run but could not. Like an animal cornered by a wild predator, I froze, hoping I might not be noticed. The sliding sound became small scratching noises, and just beyond the light, I noticed motion near the floor. A small form began to emerge, but when it reached the edge of the light, it stopped. It was an infant, an actual human baby. I recalled the infant who led me in my first dream, but that baby looked different than this one. This one's skin hung purple from its bones, and its eyes seemed to pop out from their sunken sockets. It looked like a living carcass. It locked eyes with me. I felt the urn slip out from under my arm, but could do nothing to stop it. I remained completely frozen. The infant reached one skeletal hand into the light and touched the box while keeping eye contact with me. Its tiny fingers drew the box back into the shadows. They both disappeared. I shut the door, leapt over Lawrence's scattered ashes, and ran. I didn't bother to secure the padlock on the manhole cover before driving off. Not once, looking back. While I was exploring beneath Lawrence Crutchfield's golf course, another event crucial to this story took place at the hospital where his wife Adele was recovering from surgery following their car accident. A man by the name of Roger Hickox, formerly Father Roger Hickox, whom she wanted to officiate Lawrence's funeral, came to visit her bedside 2 days after the accident. Besides being the Crutchfields' former priest, Roger served as Adele's spiritual advisor, confidant, and friend. Although, as he was about to learn, certain aspects of her life she kept private even from him. Roger, Adele cheered in a hoarse whisper when he bowed into her room. She was dressed in a hospital gown, lying at a 30-degree angle with a white sheet pulled up to her neck. Roger could see the shapes of her arms folded at the wrists across her stomach. He tried not to wince at the bruises on her neck and above, which made her face look like a weather map with storms encircling her eyes, expanding outward, growing less severe as they reached her cheeks and ears. She had a massive stitched-up gash running down the middle of her forehead at a slight diagonal angle. Her nose was practically black. He hoped his reaction didn't show when he saw that swollen thing in the middle of her face. "So nice to see you," he said, flashing a smile as he sat in the recliner next to her bed. His small but perfectly aligned teeth quickly hid behind his graying goatee. He asked, "How have they been treating you? I tried to bring you an arrangement of acacia branches, but the front desk confiscated them." "Ah," Adele scoffed. "These people and their rules. Rules. It seems that that's all they care about around here." Roger nodded softly. "And of course I'm so sorry about Lawrence. What a terrible, terrible thing to happen. I mean, the odds." Adele rolled her blackened eyes and said, "Oh, stop. I know you never liked him." Roger raised a finger to his lips, then pointed it at Adele and said, "I think you've got it backwards. He never seemed to like me, but I never minded him." "You never minded him," Adele repeated, chuckling. This small laughter obviously caused her pain, though. She winced, stopped, then said, "He just preferred you as a priest, that's all." Roger crossed himself, then pointed skyward. Looking at the ceiling, he said, "That one's for you, Lawrence." When he didn't hear Adele laugh, he looked back down and rested his hands in his lap. She wasn't looking at him, just staring blankly at the TV mounted in the far corner of the room playing a marathon of that 70s show. "I'm so sorry, Adele," Roger said. "I shouldn't make light of—" "No, it's not that," Adele interrupted. Offering a quick smile, she said, "God knows I need a good laugh, but Roger, there's something I feel like I need to tell you. I need to tell you because now that Lawrence is gone, I'm the only one who knows, and that feels risky." "I'm all ears," Roger said. He leaned forward in his chair, planting his elbows on his knees. His shaggy salt and pepper hair swung forward to frame his face, and one of his dangling earrings flashed a dart of light at Adele's eyes. She took a shuddering breath and began. "Lawrence and well, I suppose it was mostly him. He was looking for something new, some kind of uniquely spiritual experience. Some broker he knew told him about a sort of spiritual retreat down in El Salvador, and he just wouldn't shut up about it. I told Lawrence I didn't want to go all the way to El Salvador, but he said that wasn't a problem. He'd managed to procure the same ayahuasca-based compound they used down there." "I'm familiar," Roger interrupted. "With the El Salvadorian retreat?" Adele asked. Roger halfway raised one hand, cocked his head, and replied, Well, there's certainly more than one, but I actually meant the plant medicine, ayahuasca." Adele's eyes lingered on him as she tried to decide if he was telling the truth. She shifted her eyes to the ceiling before continuing. "Well, I had never heard of it, and besides, Roger said this was a unique compound based on ayahuasca. I'm not sure what made it any different. Not that I would have noticed. Anyway, the same broker friend of his apparently snuck some of this stuff back with him, or got it from... Well, it's neither here nor there. Bottom line is we cleared our living room floor, set a fire in the fireplace, stripped off our..." She stopped, her eyes flicking uncomfortably to her former priest. Even though he was now nothing more than a close friend, she often wondered if he saw her the same way. Also, at certain times, she still could not help but picture him in his cassock and Roman collar. She continued, "We got comfortable. and Roger mixed up this gray concoction with a mortar and pestle on the living room floor. He drank his half first. I insisted on it, seeing as it was his idea and his friend who procured the stuff for us. I watched his pupils expand, and he practically shouted at me to hurry up and drink so we could, as he put it, see God together. How romantic, Roger said flatly. Adele made to continue, but he interrupted her again. Actually, hold on a minute. I don't know exactly where you're going with this, but I can already tell you what you did wrong. Oh, thank God, I knew you were the person to talk to, Adele replied. Roger said, Yes. Well, there's usually a ceremony to go with such a powerful psychedelic. We modern civilized people, he put this in air quotes, might look at the rituals surrounding the drug as superfluous extravagances performed by people who don't understand neurochemical reactions. I mean, just take the damn drug, right? It's not the singing and dancing that brings on the trip, am I right? I suppose you are, Adele replied, impatiently waiting to finish her story. Wrong, Roger said. In an extremely narrow sense, yes, it is the drug which makes you hallucinate. But that's not the full... He leaned forward. When you go on a road trip, do you just hop in the car and leave, or do you prepare for the journey? I'd rather not talk about driving at the moment, Adele said. And it was at this point, in the back of his mind, Roger realized how generally unfazed his friend seemed by the tragic loss of her husband and by her own injuries. She spoke so matter-of-factly about everything. It seemed she'd already accepted the recent tragic events, or perhaps had even been expecting them. Even this objection now seemed forced and phony, like something she knew she was expected to say. Of course not, he said. But just hear me out for a minute. Before you go on a trip, you pack all the things you need, but also decide what not to bring. You'd probably make sure you have a full tank of gas and maybe even get some extra rest to make sure you're awake and alert for the drive, yes? Yes. A psychedelic trip is essentially the same, and the rituals which accompany whatever compound you're going to ingest have been honed for thousands of years to make sure you're properly prepared for your journey. So, not that I need to spell it out for you, but by skipping all that preliminary junk, you got into the car with an empty tank, and maybe instead of clothes and your toothbrush, you brought a gallon of milk and a wool sweater, but it's 85 degrees and humid out. I get the idea, said Adele, clearly annoyed by now. Roger nodded and said, Continue. He leaned back. Adele's eyes returned to the TV. The visions hit me so fast. I couldn't sit up after I drank. I had to lay myself down before I completely lost control. Soon it was like I didn't even have a body, like I was just a head. No, not even. Like I was an omnipotent ghost. But I didn't recognize the world anymore. I didn't know where to go, and the only thing that was left of the world I knew was the fire in my fireplace, still burning with the most beautiful orange light. It was just incredible. So I went to it. Walking into the fire, generally not a good idea, Roger muttered. Adele's head turned. I said it was beautiful, she snapped. Roger froze. She continued. From the flames, I heard a voice. It was calling to me, saying my name as if it were the most beautiful word in the world. I thought the voice belonged to Lawrence. Who else, I thought, would call to me that way? I thought it was him lying on the floor beside me in ecstasy, and I wanted to be with him. I wanted to join our spirits in the flames and transcend together. But it wasn't him, was it? Asked Roger. Without looking at him, Adele replied, No. I found that out almost right away. The fire became my entire reality. It consumed everything around me, but only with light, not heat. It didn't burn me. The closer I crawled to the center, I started feeling afraid of the voice calling my name. I didn't think it was Lawrence anymore. I called his name, hoping wherever he really was, he could direct me toward him. The voice then said to me, "Come into the fire, Adele. Your Lawrence built it for you." I said no, and it said something like, "I am the cure for the emptiness you feel." Or maybe it was hollowness, I can't remember. Roger leaned forward as if to say something, but Adele silenced him with a glance from her glistening eyes. When he saw how frightened she looked, he gave her a stoic nod and leaned back in his chair again. "A feeling of emptiness," Adele continued, still looking directly into Roger's eyes, "has followed me my entire life. Look at me, Roger. I'm the last person who should feel without." I thought, how did it know? By being linked to my subconscious, of course, but this thing in the fire, this thing I couldn't see, it didn't feel like a part of me. It felt like it was coming from outside. I didn't say anything to the voice in the fire, but I stopped moving toward it. I didn't move for what felt like hours, just watched and listened to the flames. Finally, I asked it. Adele sniffled, and Roger realized she'd finally begun to cry. He stood to reach the tissues on her bedside table. He handed one to her, then, as an afterthought, gave her a second before sitting back down. Adele thanked him with her eyes, using her voice to keep telling her story. "Roger, you need to understand why I felt so empty to begin with. It's something I've never been able to talk to anyone but Lawrence about, but he always told me I was being illogical. It's this life I lead, Roger. The cost of all our luxuries has always been, for me, a crushing guilt that made all our nice things impossible to enjoy. But you could see how talking to anyone about this, even to my therapist, who I'm sure lives comfortably but not nearly to the same extent as me, garnered no sympathy. And Lawrence just couldn't understand. He never felt guilty or seemed bothered by our position. My guilt, my hollow existence, was something I bore alone. So when I finally spoke to the fire again, I asked it, "Can you really cure this emptiness in me?" The heatless fire surrounding me lit up even brighter and started forming shapes. I saw multiple iterations of myself, all smiling, all with so much joy behind their eyes. Other shapes became people hugging me, waving graciously in my direction. One was my father, who's been gone a long time, patting me on the back, looking so proud of me and what I'd become, whatever that was. I looked around at the affection and appreciation being bestowed upon my many glowing selves and knew that's what I wanted. That's what I most desired. I wanted a life others would appreciate, would love me for, instead of being jealous and hating me for. That's all. I asked the voice in the flames, "How do I make this real?" And the flames replied through the many mouths of the surrounding crowd, "Open your heart, your mind, and your soul to whatever comes next." I closed my eyes but didn't stop seeing the vision. It just became clearer. Everyone in the fire was erased except my numerous clones, who all turned toward the central flame and the voice that came from it. One by one, they opened their arms and threw back their heads, ready to be engulfed. She noticed Roger had begun to look quite uncomfortable, as if he no longer belonged. Typical Roger. He'd probably come in thinking he would know exactly how to help her, exactly what to say, and now was beginning to recognize there were elements of her story and what had led her to the hospital that he had not, could not have, prepared for. It came to the point when I was the only me not opening myself to the fire, so I stood up and, just like all the others, spread my arms wide and tipped my head back. I wondered if I should say something, but I didn't have to wonder for long. I heard the low roar of the fire getting louder, angrier, hungrier, and I looked at it. It was swelling and spiraling around itself. It looked almost like a tornado spinning just a few feet away from me. I hesitated. Something felt wrong. Something felt like a lie. But before I could say or do anything to extract myself, all the other versions of me became plumes of smoke. They twisted together above the tornado of fire and got sucked into it. A moment later, a giant smoky hand shot out of the flames and wrapped around me. I could not fight against its pull. This was so clear to me, so obvious, that I didn't even try. I let it draw me into the fire. I let it burn me inside and out. My blood became lava and my breath became smoke, and I could feel them both. I felt myself melting and burning and choking, and I didn't think the pain would ever go away. I knew then, Roger. I knew I'd let something in that didn't care about fulfilling me. It didn't care about me at all. It just needed me. It used my emptiness to get what it wanted. Or maybe it needed someone as empty as me to be its vessel. "Did you learn what it was?" Roger asked, his voice low and breathy. "It was evil," Adele replied. "That's all I know." "A demon, then," Roger said. "Oh, Roger, you're still thinking like a priest. All I truly know is that it had the power to possess, to burrow into my soul and latch on, and that its intentions came from a place of pure evil." "And it latched onto you," Roger said. "Apparently so," Adele replied vaguely. Her focus seemed to dissolve and her eyes grew blurry, reflecting the ceiling tiles and the green light from the occasionally chiming machine next to her head. She said, "Lawrence had to tell me what happened after that. I was there, but everything seemed like someone else's dream. I felt what my body felt, which was mostly pain, but I had no control over it. Even my brain felt disconnected from me. I saw thoughts more than I had them. I was nothing more than my soul, but trapped inside my body." "Aren't we all?" Roger stated glibly. Adele remained distant. "Lawrence told me later he had to lock me in the spare bedroom upstairs or I probably would have hurt myself. He took out all the furniture and everything on the walls. He emptied the cupboards in the adjoining bathroom and even removed all the light bulbs. The thing inside me liked to hurt me for no other purpose than its own enjoyment. Lawrence did his best to prevent it from doing that, or at least made sure the damage wasn't too severe. He greatly underestimated my possessor, though. He rushed to the spare room one night to the sound of me, not really me, but you understand, cackling at the top of my voice. He said it sounded celebratory, like the demon, fine, we'll call it that, like the demon had won. He hurried to unlock the door and threw it open to find it staring at him through my eyes. He said it was making a face like a clown with arched eyebrows and a wide grin. He said the rest of my body was facing one of the opposite corners, though. This thing had turned my head almost completely around. I remember. I could feel the strain on my neck, the vertebra just about ready to tear away from one another. We both thought the demon was finally going to do it, going to kill me. To Lawrence's surprise, though, it allowed my neck to relax when he begged it to talk to him. It told him the only way it would leave me alone was if it were offered another in my place. I want to believe Lawrence would have given himself for me, but I cannot when I'm honest with myself, which explains the next part of his conversation with the spirit inside me. They agreed to terms I would have thought absolutely ludicrous had I been aware of the conversation happening. All I knew was the pain had momentarily stopped, which was usually my cue to rest and recuperate as much energy as possible. Anyway, Lawrence apparently forgot my age because the deal he worked out was that I would grow a child, a body without a soul for the demon to possess in my stead. Ugh, Roger scoffed, unable to mask his horror at the idea. I feel the same way telling you about it, Adele said. And obviously, in my 60s, I'm much too old to have considered getting pregnant at all possible. But Roger, I tell you, I woke up something like 2 weeks later, feeling nauseous. I realized sorry for the graphic detail, I realized while bending over the toilet that I had control of my body again, and that I could see, hear, unfortunately taste, and even more unfortunately smell everything around me. I could also feel, and what I felt nestled deep inside me, where I'd been trapped for those endless days and nights, I felt another. Not a baby, no, it was much too early for that. I felt the presence of another, which I could only imagine was the demon, Roger finished. Yes, the demon, said Adele. My God, said Roger. Adele continued. The pregnancy lasted 13 months instead of 9. Lawrence wanted to take me to the hospital after the 10th month, but I insisted on keeping my, I guess you'd say, miraculous condition to ourselves. During those months, Lawrence hired a contractor to build a bunker underneath his golf course. He told the contractor it was one of those apocalypse shelters you always hear about wealthy people building. He kept it incredibly sparse, though. It consists of just one long passageway with a heavy door at the far end that leads to a single room. In that underground room is where I finally gave birth to the creature that possessed me. And that is where it remains to this day. Lawrence switched the door's lock with one from an old church and installed a labyrinth of symbols, charms, and totems from religions and cultures all across the world along the passageway leading to it. Roger gave her a sideways glance as if expecting this to be some kind of dark joke. He saw a tear running down her cheek, though, and knew she was serious. Delusional, maybe, believing some hallucination brought on by the accident, perhaps, but she certainly believed what she was saying. So, he began, trying not to sound rude, but making sure she could detect his skepticism. So there's a baby locked away under your husband's golf course. Locking eyes with him, her own hardening with stoic resolve, Adele said, I need to make sure it stays trapped there, for all of eternity, if possible. Roger held her gaze for about 5 seconds, then leaned back, put his chin in his palm, and said, I suppose you didn't ask me here to talk about funeral arrangements. Adele called her groundskeeper and occasional concierge Ernesto to pick her up 5 days later when her doctor finally discharged her. Ernesto did not answer his phone, so Adele called the only other person she could think to, Roger. She and I did not have a familiar enough relationship for me to come to mind. That would soon change, as I'm sure you must expect. How else would I know about everything she told Roger in the hospital? Roger picked her up and drove her home. They drove in with the sun overhead, making the road look like a trillion shards of glass being swallowed by Roger's silver Hyundai Veloster. He turned them onto the semi-paved road which led to the wall of trees surrounding Adele's expansive estate. The sky grew more overcast the nearer they drove. As Roger's car crawled toward the locked gate at the beginning of the driveway, he noticed the light outside visibly diminishing. He hadn't checked the weather, so he supposed he could have been ignorant to a forecasted storm, but somehow he didn't think so. For some reason, the thickening clouds made him nervous. He knew the Crutchfield's house would certainly provide adequate protection against whatever might blow their way, but somehow their proximity to shelter did not comfort him. Truthfully, it made him quite uncomfortable. The stony scent of sepulchre wafted into the car via the air conditioner. It started to feel a little humid. Is it raining? Adele asked, looking out her window, trying different angles. Must be somewhere, Roger replied. To himself, he thought, why don't I want to be here? I want to back down this driveway and floor it up the road. Should I? But Adele... Are you sure you're ready? He asked tenderly. To be home? Of course I am, Adele answered. Roger said, I just mean, it will be the first time you've been in the house since Lawrence... Roger, drive me to the house, please, Adele enjoined. Right, Roger replied. What about the gate? Staring at her iPhone now, Adele said, It takes a code. Roger waited for a few seconds to see if Adele would share the code with him. When she did not, just started tapping at her screen, he undid his seatbelt and grabbed the door handle. He cleared his throat and said, I'd like to punch it in before the rain comes if that's... It's an app, you idiot, Adele said, finally looking up and rolling her eyes at him. Roger stared at her, only looking away when he caught the gate moving out of the corner of his eye. Adele could see he'd been mildly hurt and added, But thank you. You're a good friend, Roger. As are you, Adele. He smiled at her as he eased off the brakes and, against his growing urge to flee, rolled through the gate. It closed behind them too quickly for Roger's taste, almost like something pushed it closed against the automatic mechanism. Its punctuating clank signaled the arrival of the inevitable downpour. Roger drove them up to the house. The driveway curved around a koi pond. As they passed the pond, Adele gasped. What is it? Roger anxiously asked. The closer they got to the house, the more his nerves seemed to crackle like severed live wires. Our poor fish, Adele moaned. Look at them all. Weren't they fed? Oh, where is everyone? Roger put the car in park and craned his neck to see out her window. In a flash of silent lightning, he saw the white bellies of what must have been at least 24 koi fish floating on the surface. Are you... he began to ask, but stopped himself. Shaking her head about the fish, Adele asked, Am I what? Are you absolutely sure you want to go inside? He asked. Putting a hand on her shoulder, he said, As your spiritual advisor, I feel I need to warn you that I'm sensing something very dark here. It's like it doesn't want me here. Are you getting any sense of that? It sounds like my spiritual advisor is a little paranoid, Adele chided. She unbuckled herself. All I'm feeling is that I want to be home. Now, do you have an umbrella in here somewhere? Back here, Roger said, already reaching behind her seat for the black umbrella he always kept there in case of rain. Rather than offer it to Adele, he opened his own door, stuck the umbrella out to open it, and stepped out of the car. On a perfect day, or almost any other kind of day, the Crutchfield mansion looked like something out of a storybook. It sprawled 100 feet in either direction, white with black accents, pillars guarding the front door and rising all the way through the second story where a balcony with an ornate railing looked down on the pond. But on that dark, stormy morning, the house looked oppressive. It gave Roger the same feeling he felt when he'd visited prisons and funeral homes in his previous career. Rain poured down off the balcony, forming a curtain between the pillars. Through the falling water, Roger could see the black front door. It gave him a gutting sense of foreboding, and he considered getting back in the car and simply driving away. What could Adele do to stop him? But Roger ignored this feeling, joining Adele in calling himself paranoid as he walked around the front of the car to open her door. Thank you, Roger, she said, stepping out under his offered umbrella. To fully shield her meant partially exposing himself, but Roger stoically walked her the short distance to the porch. She moved slowly on her feet. He wondered why she hadn't been given a cane, then realized she'd probably rejected it out of pride. The rainy curtain drenched Roger's back just before he and Adele were finally shielded by the balcony. There, Adele thanked him, smiling and tilting her head, then left his side to unlock the front door. Her body language gave the impression she might step right through the door, but after she pushed it open, she froze mid-step. She placed her raised foot back where it started. "Roger?" she called. His face as still and expressionless as a dead man's, Roger said, "Yes." He did not move closer to her. Once she'd opened the door, every negative feeling he'd felt amplified by double. A new, almost premonitory feeling added itself, a haunting knowledge that he was going to die here. "Roger," Adele repeated, peering through the now halfway open door. "Roger, something's wrong." "Please get away from there," Roger said, his voice barely more than a breathy whisper. The open door had a bipolar magnetic quality, both urging him toward it and repulsing him. This contradiction nauseated him. He repeated, "Adele, please come away from the door." She stepped to the side so as not to stand directly in front of the door, but continued peering inside. "Oh, Roger, it's..." She trailed off, now stepping backward. Roger tried to see into the house, but everything looked black. He'd noticed most of the curtains were drawn, and with the storm outside, he supposed the shadows in the house could have been natural, but then, what was Adele reacting to? She retreated to him, leaving the door agape. "Please don't go in there," he whispered to her. She could only just hear him above the pattering rain. "I can't," she whispered back, staring through the door. "What did you see?" Roger asked, looking away, trying to break the door's pull on him. "I didn't," Adele started. "I didn't see anything. It's just, I have a feeling." "Me too," Roger said, relieved to hear her say it. "But we can't just leave the door open," said Adele. Roger looked from her to the door, then back. He continued hearing haunting whispers about his death. Otherwise, he would have automatically gone to the door himself. He wondered if Adele heard the same voices in her head. After a few seconds, Adele nudged him. He looked at her, saw a pleading fear in her eyes. He nodded curtly and handed her the open umbrella. Even though the overhanging balcony still shielded her from the rain, she raised the umbrella over her head as Roger approached the door. Roger tried to see deeper into the shadows. He'd been to the house a handful of times before and looked for the traces of familiar objects, like the narrow table running along the staircase near the entryway. It usually had flowers on it, brightly colored orchids, tulips, roses, and such, depending on the season. Objects began to take shape as he came within arm's reach of the door. At this proximity, he became certain the shadows were too dark, too dense to be natural. These shadows were a mask, a veil for something not wanting to be seen. He swallowed and reached his right hand inside for the doorknob. Two small, dim lights lit up side by side low to the ground at the end of the entryway. At the same time, Roger heard a growl too low to be a dog, but similar in timbre. The door slammed shut, jamming his outstretched fingers nearly hard enough to snap them. Roger fell backward, holding his throbbing hand. He screamed, "Get back to the car!" and practically tripped over himself as he ran, almost leaving Adele to hobble back to the car herself. Lightning cracked overhead, splintering the atmosphere with sharp, immediate thunder. Only Roger saw it strike. Its afterglow fizzled along the flag sticking up from the second hole of Lawrence's golf course. Adele shouted and grabbed his arm to stop him as the flag caught fire, waving rapidly in defiance of the rain. The flames finished consuming that flag. In the same second, another bolt of lightning struck the first and closest flag to Roger and Adele. That one, too, caught fire, in spite of the pouring rain. "Get in," Roger shouted. He rushed Adele to the car and shoved the umbrella into her hands. He didn't bother with chivalry this time, just opened his own door and dove into his car. Adele, wincing at her healing wounds, rounded the car and did the same. Staring at the closer of the charred flagpoles, Roger said, "I don't think it wants us here." "Will your car get us down there?" Adele asked. She pointed to the knobby grove of trees across the golf course. "Adele, I think we should—" "Roger, I need to make sure the baby is still locked inside the bunker. I don't know how it possibly could have escaped, but if it did, someone needs to know." "I don't know, Adele," Roger replied. "It's pouring. The ground will be soft. We could get stuck." Adele pursed her lips and shook her head. She grabbed her door handle and said, "Fine. Just wait for me here." "Adele!" Roger shouted. She immediately paused, having expected this reaction. Resigned, he said, "Okay, let's try. But if the car feels like it could get stuck, I'm turning around. This is our only way out of here." "My Mercedes is still in the garage," Adele assured him. "And where are the keys?" Roger asked, putting his Hyundai in gear. Adele looked toward the house and quietly answered, "Right. Let's just be careful then." Roger felt the wheels slipping beneath them as they cruised over the golf course toward the knobby grove. His Veloster didn't have any trouble at 20 miles per hour, but he feared what might happen to it when they stopped. They might not be able to get it moving again if it sat too long and sank. The storm wasn't showing any sign of letting up. Lightning grew frequent, many bolts striking close, although not as deliberately as the first two. They felt like reminders of the storm's power, warnings not to step out of line. Although the rain prevented them from seeing too far into the distance, Roger was pretty sure he could see sunlight and a blue sky not far past the property line. He didn't say anything about it to Adele, but thought she likely noticed the strange concentration of the storm as well. "Don't drive into the trees, there's roots sticking up," she warned as they neared the grove. "Wasn't planning to," Roger said. He slowed down, preparing to make the dreaded stop. Before the car completely stilled, Adele already had her hand on the knob. She turned to say, "Stay in and keep the car running. If it's gotten free, we need to leave as quickly as possible." "Wonderful plan, darling," Roger replied, flashing her a sarcastic, toothy smile. Adele turned away and groaned. "This will be slightly more tolerable without the attitude, thank you." Roger didn't respond. With a deep breath and a sigh, Adele shoved the door open and hurled herself into the rain. She limped toward the knobby grove, devoid of any leaves so it would not provide any shelter from the rain. She stopped in the center of the grove. Roger's heart sank when he saw her hands shoot up to her forehead, and for a moment he thought she might faint. This, he assumed to be a sign of bad news. Then, as if moving unconsciously, Adele turned around in place and crouched to the ground. Roger scrunched his forehead and leaned forward, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Adele's body disappeared in the grass. Then her head vanished as well. Roger swore and kicked his door open, lunging into the pouring rain. He slammed the door to get it out of his way so he could sprint to the knobby grove. By the time he entered the trees, Adele had completely vanished. He shouted her name and ran toward the place he'd last seen her. The toe of his loafer slammed into something hard, nearly tripping him. He glanced down and saw he'd kicked a manhole cover. Still recovering, he nearly put his uninjured foot through a wide hole. He saw how Adele disappeared. There was a ladder going down into the hole. He could see no light down there, and over the rain he couldn't hear anything either. He tried calling Adele's name, but a sharp burst of thunder muted his voice. Though every instinct screamed at him to flee, he could not leave her down there, handicapped and alone. So, biting his lower lip, he descended into the darkness. Halfway down the ladder, a hand reached out and grabbed his ankle. Roger screamed and flailed his leg to shake the hand loose. Thankfully, it let him go easily. "Roger!" Adele hissed at him. "Adele, what are you? Get out of here, quickly! We need to leave right away!" Roger scrambled up the slippery ladder, turning immediately to hoist Adele out of the hole. Without another word, he aided her back to his car. Now they were both soaked but paid little mind to the wet and damp making their joints and muscles ache. The front wheels spun as Roger put the car in gear. He turned them slightly, searching for traction. He knew this might dig them in deeper, but fortunately one of his wheels found a tree root and pulled them forward. He kept the car in low gear to get them off the course. When they reached the driveway, he shifted and sped toward the gate. "I'm guessing I don't have to ask," he said as the ominous house shrank in the rear windshield. Adele shook her head. It had been hard to tell at first due to the rainwater dripping from her flattened hair, but now Roger could see she was crying. She reached clumsily for his right arm and slid her hand down it until she found his. He released the wheel to squeeze her hand tightly. Whispering, Adele said, "I don't know how, but it's free, Roger. My baby is free." After I didn't hear from Adele or anyone representing her within the expected time frame, I decided to call her myself on October 31st. I did not come to this decision lightly, as I had seemingly diverted the threat against my life and wasn't keen to involve myself with anything related to it again. By turning over the key to the child, I seemed to have appeased it. I did not dream of the bunker or of my bedroom in flames any longer. There was also the matter of Lawrence's ashes spilled on the bunker floor. When I finally called Adele, I hadn't decided quite what to say about the ashes' whereabouts yet.
"Who are you?"
she asked, harsh and suspicious. I said, "Hello, Mrs. Crutchfield. My name is Glenn Rawlins, your husband."
"Have you been to my house?"
Adele hissed into the phone, interrupting me. For the sake of credibility, I've always found it best to be honest in the face of such a question. You need not divulge more than is asked for, but always answer with the truth. "Yes, ma'am, I have." Adele tightened the parameters of her questioning.
"Why? What did you do there?"
When asked two questions in unison, you might be able to avoid answering whichever question you address second. Choose carefully. "Ma'am, please forgive any intrusion. I had some of your husband's belongings I wished to return." My own question for myself burned in the background. What will I tell her I've done with his ashes? This problem glared at me. Adele would want to know why, if I'd visited the house, I didn't leave the ashes there. I only consoled myself with the slim possibility Adele had yet to learn Lawrence's remains had been turned over to me. Referencing my previous tip about answering truthfully without divulging too much, I could simply tell her I did not have the ashes in my possession.
"What did you have that belonged to Lawrence?"
Adele asked. "Ma'am, I'm—"
"Enough with the ma'ams, Rollins, and speak to me straight."
When she called me by only my last name, the way her husband used to, I learned Adele must have spoken to him at least a little about me. How much she knew I could not be certain, but this severely subtracted from the odds she didn't know about the ashes. Lawrence had told me she didn't know I had his cigar box. According to him, she would be content to let me keep it and the key it contained. If such turned out to be true, I wouldn't have to admit anything I'd done under the golf course, if not for those damned ashes. I still hadn't answered her question. "Adele," I began. "Shortly before your husband's death, he visited me. He left me something he said only you knew about, and he asked me to keep it locked away. He also said you might prefer it if I continue safeguarding this item. Is that what you would like to do?" Still sounding somewhat dazed, Adele asked,
"What is it?"
And feeling a rising anger I didn't expect, I answered, "You know what it is, Adele." That moment, she knew. I'm not sure exactly what she detected in my voice or if something I had said accidentally gave me away, but I could hear the accusation in her long, silent pause. Adele finally broke the silence by whispering,
"You set him free, you ignorant bastard."
Nonplussed, I was relieved not to have to hide the truth any longer. I asked, "Who did I free, ma'am?" She answered,
"The devil's son."
I recalled the shriveled infant crawling out of the dark in the bunker. The devil's son. As someone who never believed in the devil, I found it shocking how much that title scared me. It wouldn't have if I had not seen him with my own eyes. That unnatural thing emitted undeniable evil, even if I can't explain how. You know Adele's story now. You know how she became pregnant and what she gave birth to 13 months later. I, however, had yet to hear it. To me, what lurked beneath the golf course and why it was there was still a mystery. As possibilities and terrifying potentialities assaulted my mind, a question I should have kept to myself made its way to my lips. What is that thing? Adele went quiet again, so I admittedly begged, "Please, Adele, I need to know." And so she shared the story she'd told Roger with me, bringing the total number of knowledgeable persons to 4. 3, if you only count the living. In response to her story, I shared my own. I told her everything I'd done at her estate, ending with fleeing in my car after leaving the creature in the bunker with the key. I apologized for losing her husband's ashes. Put against everything else, she wasted no concern on the lost remains. She only wanted to talk about the evil I'd unleashed. She told me about the state of her house, of her land. She said she still hadn't heard from her groundskeeper, Ernesto. She put all of her guilt onto me, even though I'd only become a part of this story through happenstance and lies of omission.
"I know the sort of person you are,"
Adele said.
"I know the sort of people you associate with. Lawrence wasn't perfect by a long shot, but I'd bet he was one of your more decent clients, wasn't he, Rollins? I know there are others who ask you to do less mundane things for them. I'm sure you wouldn't want anyone looking too closely into your business, your clients, would you?"
I said, "Excuse me?" bristling at the threat. Adele told me,
"What's happening is as much your fault as mine now. You're going to help me fix this or suffer the consequences."
I didn't argue. I wanted to. I could have. But it seemed futile. I just said, "Yes, ma'am." I met with Adele and her friend Roger Hickox in a small gravel parking lot near the end of the road leading to her estate. The lot was connected to a picnic shelter which belonged to the state park sprawling south of the road. We utilized the shelter to get out of the light rain. Roger introduced himself as Adele's spiritual advisor, which made it impossible for me to take him very seriously. Having been warned about his inclusion in this matter, I spent the previous evening researching Mr. Hickox and his history with the church. I learned he left the priesthood by choice, although sticking around much longer may have resulted in a less voluntary separation. I discovered rumors suggesting he'd partaken in affairs with multiple women and also seemed to have a proclivity for psychoactive substances. Through methods I'll keep private, I discovered screen names on various forums and chat rooms which tied back to Father Hickox, through which he attempted to learn about or acquire compounds such as MDMA and LSD. He seemed to be quite versed in plant medicine as well, such as psilocybin and, of course, cannabis. It made me question why Lawrence had not reached out to Roger when he and Adele were looking for a new experience of consciousness. Perhaps Lawrence didn't trust him. I could understand why. When I met Mr. Hickox, he wore a white linen shirt and leisurely khaki pants. He tipped his white fedora to me as he reached forward to shake my hand, holding his other on a leather satchel to keep it from swinging forward. I switched my umbrella to my left hand to shake back. This was before we moved under the picnic shelter. Adele stood behind him beneath her own umbrella, glaring at me through half-framed glasses that gave her a teacher's stern authority. Perhaps as the result of childhood conditioning, the look in her bruised eyes made me want to cower like a dog. I'm not a man who cowers at much. She wore tan gardening pants and a blue flannel over a white shirt. She, unlike Roger, who looked ready for a stroll on the boardwalk, looked prepared for dirty work. Couldn't we discuss what needs to be done at the house? I asked, indicating the rain surrounding us. That isn't possible since you let the child loose, Adele replied, glaring harder at me. Sensing the need for a rational third party, albeit a biased one, Roger said, "The house and land are poisoned by the power of the dark spirit possessing the child. As soon as we set foot on the property, we'll be in danger. That's why we need to put our heads together now to figure out what to do. Once we go through that gate, it'll be time for action. It won't allow us time for much else." "Well, you're the spiritual advisor," I said. "This is your area of expertise, so what do we do? Kill the baby?" "It's not a baby," Adele needlessly corrected. She just wanted to bite down on me. I couldn't help my eyes from flicking to the ugly scar running down the middle of her forehead. It was still held together by stitches. Nodding, Roger said, "What that baby contains is older than this entire planet and maybe even the universe. We're going to war with a demon, Mr. Rollins, and there will be battles on various fronts, both physical and metaphysical." "And we're going to win this war in an afternoon?" I asked, credulity dripping from my voice. "It'll take as long as it takes," Adele snapped. I said, "Maybe you should tell me more about the house. Why can't we go there?" "We'll need to soon," Roger said. "Probably best to get this over with, although I'd hoped we could learn more about the spirit inhabiting it first. No one should forget more than our lives are at stake here. In this battle, we're fighting for our souls." "No, Roger," Adele said. "I grew that horrible thing inside me in exchange for my soul. I can't explain why, but I believe it will honor our deal. I'm not worried about losing my soul." "I think I closed a deal with it as well when I left it the key," I said, avoiding Adele's eyes. "My soul should be just fine." "Well, aren't you at least concerned for your lives?" asked Roger. I stood by and waited for Adele to answer. Adele didn't answer, but looked toward her mansion, of which we could see just the highest peaks through the sparsely dressed trees. It was quite obvious to me that the widow feared deeply for her life, regardless of how she felt about her soul. This, I must admit, terrified me. Yet, despite the clear apprehension oppressing our group, we returned to our cars and proceeded to the gate, then up the driveway to the Crutchfield estate, then to the front door of the mansion, which was already open. "That's a good thing," Roger yelled through the rain, pointing at the gaping door. Opening his umbrella, he clarified, "It means no one's been here since we left." "No, it doesn't," Adele said, staring at the door as rain drenched her before Roger rushed over to shield her. She looked at me and finished, saying, "Maybe it means anyone who entered never left." I, having not seen what the other two saw the last time they visited, stepped inside the house without hesitation. The darkness of the entryway looked natural because of the storm. Only once amongst them did I realize the shadow's density. There existed almost a clear line where the faint light from outside ended and the house's darkness began. "Do you feel anything?" Roger asked. I said, "No, I'm not particularly excited to be here, but I can't say I'm detecting anything specific." Adele followed me in, then Roger. "Should I?" he asked, holding the door. "Leave it open," I said. Roger let go. The door moved anyway. With an echoing groan, the hinges rotated. Adele made a weak attempt to catch the door before it shut completely, but it narrowly avoided her fingers and slammed shut, casting us into utter darkness. "Lights," I ordered, already reaching into my pocket for my phone. I heard Roger's voice. "No, no, no, no." "Yours is dead too?" Adele shouted. I pressed every button on my phone, could feel them depressed beneath my fingers, but none brought it to life. "It must have drained their power," Roger hissed.
"Anyone bring a flashlight?"
Adele asked. Roger gasped. "Oh, no, but I do have..." Seconds later, a tiny firelight appeared in his hand. He held up a Bic lighter from his satchel, illuminating our grouped faces. He grabbed a decorative candle off the entryway table and lit it. Never actually intended for use, the candle burned weakly. Every flicker made me believe darkness would reclaim us. With time for our eyes to adjust, the rest of the room slowly came into view around the candle in Roger's hand.
"Oh, here,"
Adele said, shuffling away from us toward a sprawling floral arrangement near the end of the table. In the center of the arrangement stood a candelabra with 3 white candles which appeared to have never been lit. Roger hurried over, and with some difficulty spread his small flame to each of them.
"Will you carry it?"
Adele asked me. I agreed automatically, failing to predict that this would make me our flagship as we pressed on. The only way forward took us through a transitional archway into a massive entertainment space with matching couches running parallel on either side of a tree root coffee table. At the edges of my faint candlelight, I saw a stocked bar, which I must admit tempted me, a billiard table, a dartboard, 2 TVs, a mini fridge, and even not 1 but 2 doors leading to restrooms perpendicular to a 3rd door, which led to the rear patio. I knew why the main space in the Crutchfield's mansion was designed this way, but if I tell you, it might make it too easy to guess Lawrence and Adele's true identities, and my professionalism simply won't allow it. At each side of the room, hallways branched into the east and west wings. Neither held anything but blackness for us, so Roger and I turned to Adele for direction.
"Me? I don't know where we should go," she said.
Roger, guessing, said, "Let's try this way first," and pointed down the hall to our right, the east wing. I led them that way. "Do you have any idea what we're looking for or what we're going to do when we find it?" I asked Roger. "Well, you would know better than I what we're looking for, wouldn't you?" he retorted. I shook my head. Yes, I had seen the demon child, but the experience hadn't been very enlightening. If I thought I knew anything, it was that we shouldn't have been in that house. But that I attributed solely to the way the shadow-saturated place made me feel while we walked through it. About halfway down the hall, before we came to any rooms, Roger reached forward and grabbed me around the bicep. I wanted to beat him with the candelabra, but contented myself with snarling at him. He held a finger to his lips and turned his back to me. I saw Adele also facing the way we had come. "What is it?" I whispered, not bothering to mask my impatience. "I'm not sure," said Roger. "I sense something." As if its cover had been blown, something in the west hallway, with a voice like dusty gravel, groaned, Roger pulled Adele behind himself and barked, "You can't touch her. You have no authority over..." Pounding heavy footsteps rattled the windows and shook the floor as the thing with the gravel voice charged toward us in the dark. We all turned to run the only way we could, further into the east wing. Having no idea where I was going, I stepped aside to usher Adele to the front. Roger, the flea, pushed past me as well. The footsteps were almost upon us. I pivoted to face them, holding the candelabra out like a shield. The footsteps continued mercilessly beating the floor. Then, at the very edge of the candlelight, they stopped. With only a meek squeal from one floorboard, the creature finally revealed itself. The shriveled baby, with eyes that seemed about to roll out of their sunken sockets. We stood there at a stalemate. I felt the candelabra growing slick in my hand. With a roar, the demon child pounced. I swung at it, blowing out all 3 candles at once. I yelled, "Run!" But none of us had quite grasped the totality of the darkness engulfing the house yet, not until our only light went out. I heard the child land against the wall, then floor, apparently missing all of us. I could not tell where it went next. I swung the candelabra back and forth at the ground in all directions, but not too hard in case I struck one of my companions. I heard Adele scream behind me. Noises from Roger's invisible reaction rustled near my left. I spun toward both noises, raising the candelabra above my head. "Let her go," Roger screamed. Next came a sound you should count yourself lucky if you have not heard before. Flesh splitting apart. Skin makes a very distinct sound when it tears. I dropped the candelabra, reaching with both hands for Adele or her assailant. Roger and I stood side by side, bumping each other's elbows. I yelled, "Stand still," but Adele didn't listen. Roger yelled, "Where is it?" but she didn't answer. Adele Crutchfield's voice suddenly dropped through the air, stopping somewhere near our feet. I yelled, "Roger, your lighter!" His clothes rustled, and he made an anxious noise through his nose. I heard the scratch of his lighter once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th, a spark flashed, and on the 5th, a tiny flame finally appeared like a projection from his quaking fist. We both immediately saw Adele, lying down with the scar on her forehead torn open and bleeding, and the broken stitches sticking out like spider legs. It had been more than just her skin I heard ripping. The thing which broke her head open now lay still on her beating chest, its shriveled purple face coated in blood, its eyes open, but completely vacant. Roger reached for Adele's hand, leaving me to remove the unconscious infant from her. Before I could, an enormous pale arm swept toward us from the dark and knocked our heads together. I felt stunned but remained on my feet. Roger hit the wall. His lighter went dark again. Dizzy, I once more yelled for everyone to run and sprinted away. I wasn't sure which direction I'd picked, but no walls or furniture got in my way, so I ran. When I did find a wall, I felt along it and started moving slowly to silence my footsteps. This proved relatively easy, with the chaotic thumping and shouting coming from Roger and Adele, who'd apparently taken off in the opposite direction. I feel no shame in telling you it frightened me to be alone in the dark. But to be completely honest, I found it comforting that the others continued making so much noise, putting targets on themselves. It surprised me to learn I'd left the hallway. The wall I found and followed took me deeper into the entertaining room we'd first entered. I discovered this when I ran stomach first into the bar. Fortunately, the sturdy thing didn't shake when I collided with it. All the bottles remained still. I wondered briefly if a sip of bourbon might benefit my nerves, but decided to err on the side of mental clarity over the dulling comfort of alcohol. I thought the bar might provide an answer to a different problem, though. I guessed this based on the woody smell of cigar smoke that permeated the edges of the room's synthetic air freshener aroma. With much care not to bump into anything, I eased myself behind the bar. My eyes began to adjust slightly. In this room, ambient light from the windows managed to mingle with the unnatural shadows in a way that gave shape to things directly in front of me. I still could not make out the individual cupboards and drawers behind the bar as I opened them, but I could tell when I reached the last one. I opened it, reached in, and finally found a single box of matches. I'd been hoping for a butane lighter, but the matches would have to do for as long as they lasted. Roger and Adele had quit making noises by then. I couldn't be sure where they'd gone, but at one point I thought I heard them thudding upstairs. I hoped their silence meant they'd found somewhere safe to hunker down, but I didn't care about them enough to alter my own plan of escape. Saving the matches until I needed one, I crept out from behind the bar. I could ever so faintly detect the couches and the tree root table, which looked like a lurking eldritch creature in the dark. I used these landmarks to orient myself toward the invisible archway, which would lead me to the front door. Thunder clapped outside. I wondered if it was still raining. Not that it mattered. Once outside, I would sprint to my car and evacuate the land. Maybe I would call for help for Adele and Roger, but probably not. I owed nothing to either of them, and frankly, if Adele met her end in that dark house, I would be glad to be free from her, as well as from the evil she'd brought into this world. I felt no obligation to her, or her confused spiritual advisor for that matter. After leaving the couch's side, I entered a limbo of darkness which required me to extract one of the matches. I struck it along the edge of the box. With that satisfying little pop, the match birthed a tiny flame. I held it out, finding the archway with ease. I was almost free. I stepped through the archway. Its shadow seemed to bend around me as I stepped through the entryway. My dying match lit up something I did not expect to see, something which threw a huge wrench in my escape plan. A massive, bearded, bloodied man, wearing tattered brown overalls and what had once been a white shirt, now stained red, guarded the front door. I shouted, "You!" My panicked questions, "Who are you? What are you doing? What do you want?" all condensed into that one word, "You." And then I stood there, dumb, both waiting for an answer and considering what to do next. Physically, I stood no chance against the behemoth in front of me. I could let the match die and then take my chances hiding in the dark, but something about the behemoth's piercing pinprick eyes made me think he wouldn't need light to find me. My match went out. I quickly struck a new one. The man guarding the door did not move. It seemed he had one purpose, and one purpose only: to guard the door. I wondered if he could just be a mannequin or animatronic. It would explain his unnatural stare. Before I could begin any sort of advancement, though, the enormous guard crumpled to the floor in a heavy heap of thudding limbs, startling me almost as much as his initial appearance. I wasted no time climbing over him to reach the door, though. I had my first leg hanging over him, ready to step across, when his eyes opened, and the hateful hunger I saw in them caused me, before I even realized it, to scream. Roger and Adele made it all the way upstairs in the dark and entered the first room they came to. Roger closed and locked the door. "Where are we?" he asked. Adele panted, "It's the bathroom." Roger flicked his lighter as thunder rumbled above, startling them both. His hand jerked in surprise, prematurely killing the light. In its brief flash, they saw they had indeed shut themselves into a windowless bathroom with no way out besides the door and no way to see what waited for them on the other side of it. Roger lit his lighter again. This time, he held it steady. He said, "Look around for something we can use as a weapon." "Some spiritualist you are," Adele scoffed as she began opening drawers. "Excuse me," Roger snorted. Adele said, "I thought you could do some sort of cleansing to fix this. Now you're talking about weapons? Roger, did you listen to my story at all? The spirit emerged from the fires of another realm. You can't kill it with a..." She held up a straight razor that had, until recently, belonged to her husband. "Give me that," Roger growled. He snatched the closed razor from Adele's pinched grip. She looked at him, startled by his sudden aggression. He flicked his wrist, opening the razor up as another roll of thunder shook the ceiling above them. He said, "This isn't for the child. It's for whatever hit me and Glenn downstairs. There's something else here, and it's strong. Until we know what it is, I'd like to be prepared for..." Ugh! He suddenly flicked his wrist and the light went out. It flickered back to life in his other hand. "Sorry, my thumb got too hot to..." He trailed off when he noticed Adele's jaw dropping and retracting, tightening the skin on her face. Her eyes grew, looking slightly downward, and her lips came back together in a whimpering frown. Roger asked, "What do you..." but trailed off again as he saw for himself what caught Adele's attention. A tiny, purple hand writhed under the base of the door, nubby fingers sprawled as if reaching for something inside, reaching for them. It went still when he crouched to examine it. "Roger," Adele warned, "what are you doing?" Shaking his head and gritting his teeth, Roger replied, "We've got to get out of here." He gripped the razor tightly and offered his lighter to Adele.
Roger, no,
she pleaded. He shook the lighter at her, grimacing. She repeated her denial, but when Roger released his thumb and the flame went out, her hands shot forward to take the lighter from him. The tip burned her palm. She still attempted to relight the flame over and over as she heard the terrible, dry sound of the razor cutting soft, dry flesh. Finally, the small flame returned. Roger was now on his knees, gripping the tiny fingers with one hand and sawing at the purple wrist with the other. Adele felt herself about to faint. She collapsed onto the toilet lid and turned to vomit into the bathtub.
It's not fighting back,
Roger observed as distantly as if he were watching the butchery happen in a movie instead of performing it himself. He looked at Adele, brow scrunched. When she remained unresponsive, just sobbed over the tub, Roger stood, pinching the blackened, dripping razor tightly. He kicked the partially severed hand and witnessed no response. He jerked the door wide open.
Roger,
Adele screamed, coming to. But nothing happened. The lighter's pitiful glow bled into the hallway, barely reaching as far as the infant's still body on the hardwood floor outside the bathroom. It lay face down. Like after it couldn't get inside the bathroom, it just gave up and died. Black blood oozed out of its wrist in a puddle which encircled much of its torso. Adele came to Roger's side, steadying herself against him. She could feel how scared he was by his stiffness and his jerky breaths.
This might be our chance to end this, Roger whispered.
Cut its ugly head off, Adele whispered back. Roger shook his head.
It's no use. That baby's been rotting since it was born. It's nothing but a shell for the thing you saw come out of the fire. What I meant was, we need to lock it back up.
In the bunker? Adele asked.
It's the only...
Roger was cut short by a sound from outside. It was my voice, likely shouting like a madman. I barely remember the sound that came out of me as I sprinted away from the house to my car. I could feel every heavy raindrop that bombed my skin, but the lumbering behemoth chasing me made the rain pretty easy to ignore. After the large man woke up from his ever so brief slumber, I'd chosen to lunge for the door rather than retreat back into the house. I knew he'd been trying to keep me away from the exit and made the conscious decision not to let him. I managed to get outside, but the giant was right on my heels by the time I reached the car. Upstairs, Adele and Roger found a window through which they watched me open my car door and slam my pursuer with it like a shield. I heard their shouts and glanced up, seeing them illuminated like a couple of ghosts stranded in the shadows. Roger held something that looked like an enormous dead rat in his arms. I know now it was Adele's demon child. Beneath a bolt of lightning, the giant reached over the car door. He grabbed a hold of my shirt with both hands and hoisted me over the window before slamming me onto the hood. Rain poured into my mouth and eyes as I struggled to free myself, but his powerful grip held me hopelessly tight. I lashed out with kicks to his stomach and groin, which failed to affect him. His long hair and putrid beard dripped on my face. He carried a deathly stench the rain could not wash away. His hands slid up to my neck and began to squeeze. Roger and Adele rushed out of the house, Roger still holding the small, empty corpse. I heard Adele shout, "Ernesto, what are you doing?" Ernesto. That was the name of the Crutchfield's groundkeeper. I recognized it from conversations with Lawrence about the estate. The unwitting man had most likely returned to check on the house and land shortly after I'd freed the demon from the bunker. He'd been its first victim, unless you count the unborn baby it used as a vehicle to enter this world. Now the spirit was trying to use Ernesto to claim me as its second victim. It seemed to have abandoned the small, frail form of the infant in favor of the gargantuan man now squeezing my throat. I continued landing futile strikes with my fists and feet. My limbs grew weak as Ernesto deprived me of oxygen. I thought it was the end for me. Then, just as my head started going numb, the hands around my neck loosened. I made an adrenalized attempt to bolt away,
but the deprivation stole my balance and I just collapsed in front of my car. I lifted a throbbing hand to shield myself, saw Ernesto's back, then saw what averted his attention. Roger stood at the edge of the koi pond, the contents of his satchel spilled out behind him. In one hand, he held a knife, shining even in the rain. In his other hand, he held the lifeless abomination.
"I knew it,"
Adele's voice cried from behind Roger's car. She yelled,
"I can see it in his eyes. It's the same spirit."
My vision clarified. I could see Roger's glimmering knife shaking. Masking his fear, Roger said, "Let that man go, spirit. He has no part in this. Leave him and release his soul to the light." Ernesto stretched his hands outward and tipped his face to the rain. A bolt of lightning absorbed him and blinded us all. I could feel its heat as I crawled away. It crackled and screeched until I thought my skull might shatter. When the crackling stopped, I opened my eyes and peered around the car. Ernesto remained on his feet, bent over backwards, with a few remnants of his clothes burning until the rain put them out. Raindrops evaporated off of his scorched skin. He fell back onto his face before his body collapsed in a steaming heap of charred flesh and exposed bone. A shriek from Adele brought me to my feet. How I knew the cry had nothing to do with the electrocuted groundskeeper, I cannot tell you. Something about it warned of new danger. I saw Roger struggling with the infant, which had suddenly become furiously animated. The child wrapped its feet around his neck and tore out a patch of his hair. His knife hung uselessly in his hand. He couldn't slash at the creature so close to his face and neck, but he still didn't seem to want to drop the weapon either. As for myself, I felt no obligation to intercede on Roger's behalf. I'd only just escaped the possessing spirit myself, and I remembered that I'd only accompanied Adele and Roger under threat of blackmail. Remember, I'd already done my part to appease the spirit. I dared not interfere with it again and risk stumbling back into its crosshairs. Adele saw enough reason to help Roger, though. She probably assumed the demon would turn on her as soon as it finished with him, and she likely, and accurately, guessed that I would let it. She stepped hesitantly toward them as they struggled near the edge of the pond. She took the knife from Roger, freeing him to wrestle the strangling baby with both hands. Before he could wrench it off of his face, the child stuffed the fistful of hair it stole from him into his mouth. Its wrist, the same Roger had slashed, disappeared up to the elbow. Roger bit down, causing the arm to retract, but it left behind the wad of hair for him to choke upon. Coughing, Roger ripped the child off of himself and threw it like a football directly into the pond, where it sunk amid the dead fish. Then he fell to his knees, hacking and fingering his throat, trying to remove the hair. Thinking our next step would be to evacuate, I slipped into my car and started it. I turned on the headlights, which happened to be aimed at the pond. I watched the ripples from the child's landing, but saw no sign of the child itself. The dead fish held my attention, though, even as Adele began shouting at me for help with Roger. The fish defied the expanding ripples and slowly began to coalesce around the child's impact. Once they reached the spot where it had disappeared, every fish sunk, as if getting sucked into a drain. The pond became still. Roger stopped coughing. Adele quit shouting. Was it over? Almost unconsciously, I turned on the car's heat. The warm air smelled of burning dust. Adele was helping Roger to his feet now, him occasionally coughing, but no longer choking. Suddenly, the air blowing from my vents changed. An appalling stench blasted onto me, sticking to my damp skin and making me feel infected. I covered my nose and turned off the air, but already so much stink filled the car I couldn't help gagging. I held my breath to wait out what I hoped to be a passing odor, but soon I needed to breathe. I involuntarily sucked down a lungful of rancid air. I couldn't stay. I stumbled back into the cold rain before I ended up vomiting all over my leather interior. The foul smell became even stronger outside. Roger and Adele seemed nearly incapacitated by it. At the end of my headlight's beam, something dark bubbled up from the pond. It looked like a fountain turning on. The devil's child, with its big, sunken eyes, rose from the water, sitting upon a slimy throne of rotten fish guts. Seeing this, Roger pushed Adele back. He planted his feet at the edge of the pond and shouted, "I command you, foul spirit, to leave this place. This woman gave you her child. She promised nothing more. Leave her home. Leave this land." The mound of wriggling guts carried the child closer to the shore. Roger's voice faltered before he continued, "Do not come any closer. I command you. Stop. Leave here and—" He trailed off again. Adele took a step back. I saw her lips form the word "no." She shook her head again and again, hearing a voice neither Roger or I could. Suddenly she screamed, "That wasn't our agreement. I won't." Then she shook her head again. Roger turned to look at her, clearly confused and concerned. Adele looked at him with something mimicking compassion, before whispering, "I'm so sorry, Roger." Then she pushed him. Without a sound, Roger fell sideways into the murky water. As a cackling baby, the spirit laughed. Roger floundered in the shallow water near the shore, searching for purchase in the mud. The water pulled him further, deeper, and he seemed unable to resist it. As he fought, the putrid mound floated closer to him. He issued one gagging cry before the throne of guts overtook him. It absorbed him head first. The baby cackled again as a red spray erupted beneath it, spraying out on all sides. It sat proudly on this fountain of blood, daring us to continue our futile resistance. I shouted, "Adele, get in!" and dove back into my car, grateful I'd left it running. Adele didn't respond, just stood paralyzed in the face of the hellish obscenity. The baby laughed again as the geyser of blood erupting around it sputtered, then died. I honked to revive Adele from her horror-stricken state. It worked. She turned, saw me, and understood. I drove toward her as she hobbled in my direction. I watched the demon child's eyes follow her, dead, yet somehow so full of malicious hatred as they caught and reflected my headlights. I hit the gas before Adele closed her door. I steered us toward the gate, preparing to ram through it. The car would take damage, would likely be totaled, but I knew it could break the gate open. It had enough power. Unfortunately, my car's power did not match that of the devil which pursued us. As we barreled toward the gate, gaining speed, a sudden crack and flash shocked me back, pushing me away from the pedals and steering wheel. I only knew the car had flown into the air when it came crashing down. We'd been struck by a lightning bolt of equal power to the one that immolated Ernesto. In case it needs to be said, the car was dead. The interior went completely dark. The windshield was shattered. Adele, in total panic, tried to escape through her door but found it wedged shut. The frame must have been bent on impact. My door, thankfully, opened. After grabbing a flashlight from my glove box, we both crawled out, our heads buzzing with leftover electricity. I spared one glance at the pond, at the demon child resting on its throne of blood-painted fish gore, and ran. The house was a trap. I assumed Roger's car would be met with the same fate as mine. I ran toward the only remaining shelter, the bunker. Adele followed me slowly, yet for reasons I dared not dwell upon, her child did not pursue her. Eyes lingering upon us, it sunk back below the pond's surface. We made it across the golf course, all the way to the manhole, down the ladder, and into that long, dark tunnel, purely on adrenaline. "What now?" Adele whimpered. I shone my light upon her frail, shivering form, outlined by her saturated clothes. She looked like an alien, with her hair flattened against her head and neck. "I'm not sure," I lied. "Just follow me." I knew what I had to do. I'd known since we crawled out of the wreckage of my car. I led Adele to the room at the end of the tunnel. The door was still open from the demon's escape, the escape I'd selfishly enabled. What I needed to do now would be no less selfish, I knew. But again, remember, I had not become involved in this situation by choice. Adele held my past involvements against me, had coerced me into being in this moment, in this place. The blame for her fate rested entirely on her shoulders, since her husband wasn't there to bear his fair share. We stepped over Lawrence's ashes and entered the desolate room at the end of the hallway. The key was still in the lock on the interior side of the door. The fateful cigar box Lawrence brought to me lay open in the center of the floor. As I shut the door and turned the key, Adele said, "That won't keep it out forever. We don't have anywhere left to go." "I know," I said, turning toward her, my light once again finding her weak form. She must have seen my intention written on my face. She took 3 steps back, cowering against the far wall. "No," I said. "I would tell you I'm sorry, but you brought this on yourself. I'm not going to end up like Roger." "I'm only here because of Lawrence. How is this fair?" Adele cried. "It's not," I replied, pushing up my sopping sleeves. If I felt any regret, it was because of how easily Lawrence had gotten off. It should have been him pressed against that cold wall. But Lawrence was dead, and now the representative of his actions would pay for his sins. Without another word, I dropped the flashlight and lunged forward. Adele recoiled, but she could not escape my hands. They slipped on her wet skin at first, became tangled in her hair, but eventually I found purchase and squeezed her throat. As she writhed in my hands, I felt her life force leaving her body. Her pulse quickened before growing too faint to detect. We slid down the wall together. I held on as we landed on our sides. I waited for 3 minutes after she went still to release her. She did not move again. Whether it arrived while I was killing Adele or entered the bunker after the life left her body, I cannot know for sure, but I noticed the stench of the demon after I picked up my flashlight again. Hoping I was correct that the demon felt no claim to me, I turned the key in the door and put it in my pocket. Jaw clenched, I opened the door and shone my light into the hallway. It stood just outside. The demon child now stood 6 feet tall, armored in the disemboweled remains of Roger and the fish, as well as charred pieces of Ernesto, all gathered into a single putrid vessel. "I left what you want in there," I said to the foul thing. The child's face stared down at me curiously. The smell of it alone felt like a possession. But it made no movement toward me. I stepped outside the room and moved aside to let it through. Its gaze fell upon Adele's still corpse, and, much to my relief, it entered the room. Without hesitation, I slammed the door shut and shoved the key into the lock. After I turned it, I instantly heard the roar of flames behind me. Pocketing the key, I turned and saw a doorway which had not been there before, yet was all too familiar. I'd seen it in my dreams. I knew what awaited me on its other side. I approached the new door slowly, knowing what lay beyond it, yet still too afraid to open it. Once I stood in front of the new door, I looked down at the key in my hand, then back toward the door at the end of the hallway. The demon wanted release again. Now that I'd seen its power, I no longer believed a simple lock could contain it, though. Why torment me over the key then? I could infer only one answer. It wanted to make me bend the knee. The demon wanted access to my position, my knowledge, my power. I safeguarded the secrets of the rich and powerful. I'd been entrusted with access to the darkest parts of their lives. If I wanted to, I could control a significant number of the world's elites. This thing Adele carried into the world, I think it was after me the whole time. It probably saw this moment coming eons ago. Well, I didn't think it would see this coming. I opened the door, saw my burning room, saw my own corpse broiling in my bed. With one last look at the key, I threw it overhand into the blazing bedroom and slammed the door shut. No one stopped to help me as I walked the many miles back to town, soaked, bleeding on my arm from a cut I suffered climbing over the locked gate. There was no storm outside of the Crutchfield's estate. Around their property, the sun shone down, warming me, providing me my only comfort. I finally reached a library where I dried off the rest of the way under a hand dryer. I bandaged myself with toilet paper, then I took the bus home, not wanting to get into a cab with an individual stranger. I feared that, somehow, the demon would find a way to reach me. I felt safer in public. Safety in numbers. This security faded when I entered my house just after sunset. I plodded upstairs. When I reached the top, I turned on the light in the hallway leading to my bedroom. It felt too similar to the bunker. It reminded me too much of the visions the demon used to manipulate me. I saw my bedroom door, closed. I never closed that door unless I was inside the room. I stood in front of the door, imagining opening it to an all-consuming inferno, but I felt no heat. I smelled no smoke. Eventually, my observations, or lack thereof, allowed me to turn the knob and push the door open. No light from fire or anything else existed inside my bedroom. Only the light from the hallway bled into the shadows. At the peak of the triangle of light let in by the door, I saw something impossible. Something I'd hoped to be lost forever. The key to the demon's prison lay on the floor next to my bed. I'd failed to end its hold on me. I'd only renewed my curse. Driven insane by the sight of the key and the hopelessness it instilled, I angrily kicked it under my bed. A spindly, blue hand reached out and caught it. A rancid combination of rotting fish, burned flesh, and blood hit me all at once. From beneath my bed crawled the corpse of Adele Crutchfield. I tried to run, but the bedroom door slammed in my face. A sliver of light from under the door kept Adele partially illuminated, just enough to allow me to watch her raise the key above her head, tip her open mouth back, and drop the key in. She, or it, swallowed, then grinned at me, showing blackened gums. I knew my chances to appease the demon had run out. As you may have noticed, I did not perish in a bedroom inferno. My life has been spared so far. My soul, on the other hand, is a prisoner. If I act outside of or in opposition to the demon's will, Adele's continually rotting corpse inevitably pays me a visit. The last time I saw her, her eyes hung like desiccated cloves of garlic from her leathery skull. She held fire in her bony hand and threatened to light my bed with it. I continue doing its bidding to prolong my chance of eventually escaping its grasp. I know if I give up and perish, my soul will belong to it for eternity. Better to remain its temporary slave while there remains any possibility of reclaiming my soul. In the meantime, I influence my powerful clients on the demon's behalf. When the requests are too sinister, too evil for even the most corrupt amongst my clientele, I am coerced to blackmail them. These are people with names you know. Their actions affect your lives and countless others. You might be thinking I should just give in, allow the devil to take me rather than let it corrupt the world any farther. I might agree if I were in your shoes, but put yourself in mine. Would you trade the world to save your soul? It must be so easy to say yes when that bargain has never been presented to you. I know the right choice, but that doesn't mean it's any easier to make. This concludes the Crutchfield estate. If you enjoyed the story, please rate, like, review, or subscribe. For early ad-free episodes and behind-the-scenes episodes I call Into the Woods, become a patron at patreon.com/thewarningwoods. You can also support the show by purchasing merch. The merch store and Patreon links are in this episode's description. To stay up to date, follow me on Instagram and TikTok at The Warning Woods. When you feel ready, meet me here for another journey into The Warning Woods. Thank you for listening, and once more, Happy Halloween.